Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
And welcome to Compass Points, the podcast of Compass, your new source for Knoxville and Knox County politics, government, business, education, all of the above. We are can be found at CompassKnox.com, and I am Scott Barker, co-founder, co-editor, co-reporter, co-everything, along with Jesse Fox Mayshark, who, as if you are regular listener of the show, you'll notice is not here today. He's a little under the weather, and so you're stuck with me. So you get a little bit more stuttering and more of a southern accent than usual. So we're hoping that Jesse gets better. He sends his regards to everybody, and we'll go ahead and jump right into it. I am with Seth Barber, who is at Barbarian Productions, who is with me here, and he may jump in from time to time. I don't know. I can't control him on my own. It takes two of us to keep him behaving nicely over there. So anyway, we'll go right into it. We had a few stories this week. This is an early week. We are recording this on Thursday. Usually we do it on Friday, so we don't have as many stories that we're going to be talking about. So one thing we will talk about is gun violence and violence interruption. The city council gave some authority to the police department to seek some funding to pay for violence interruption program through them. The city also has its own office, another office that does violence interruption, and we're going to, at the end of that segment, we're going to talk to the community safety director for the city, LaKenya Middlebrook. We'll also talk briefly about the county budget. There was an update at County Commission about where the county is in revenues. As they're getting ready to start looking at next year's budget after the beginning of the year. And then to kick it off, though, we're going to be talking about short-term rentals. Those are the things like Airbnb, where you can rent out part of your home or your entire home to people on vacation and make a little extra dough on the side. And the city council had a work session. It was actually previous week. It was on Thursday, more than a week ago now, and they're taking a look at it because they're thinking about maybe revising the ordinance. And it's one of the big issues they have is with the city's owner occupancy requirement and enforcement of it. One of the things that First of all, there are to give you a little background, there are two types of permits that you can get as a to rent out your home or part of your home for short-term rental. One is in areas that aren't zoned for residential use, like downtown, for example. You can get a permit for that. That's really not the big issue. The big issue is the permits that are given in residential areas. And according to the city figures, there are 447 total short-term rental permits out there, and 293 of them are out in neighborhoods, and they're in almost every neighborhood in the city. They're all over the place, and some have spawned some complaints. And the big thing is if you live in a residential zone and you want to rent out your home, you have to live there. It is required that be your residence. You have to stay there when your guests are there, but you have to own it and occupy it. And one of the big complaints is that people are not living in the house they claim to be living in on the permit. And so there are a lot of questions about that. City council members brought up anecdotal reports of people in their districts who had neighbors who weren't living in the house they were living in. They were renting it out. Sometimes it caused problems with parking and loud noise and parties and things like that. So one of the things that came up was how the city enforces this regulation. And one thing that you need to keep in mind is that these types of laws aren't like criminal laws. Criminal laws are designed to punish somebody for bad behavior. These kinds of laws are designed to get people to comply with the rules, and so they don't take the homeowner out if they're not living in their home and throw them in the pokey. They try to get them into compliance. The city has a contractor. It's host compliance. They scour the websites where people advertise their homes for rent, like Airbnb, and try to match them up with the city's list of permit holders. And if they find someone who does not appear to have a permit, they contact them and see if they can get them into compliance. So the one thing is that you can revoke a permit under certain situations. The city has not had to do that. According to the city officials, every complaint, every property owner who's been out of compliance has either gotten into compliance by making changes or just stopping their advertising for their rental. So and one thing that complicates this is if city council does do something to try to tighten up that enforcement action, it doesn't apply to anybody who already has a permit. State law doesn't allow them to do that. So if you've got a permit and they change the rules and they have a different set of rules, those only work for people getting new permits. They won't work, they won't be covering you. So council members will have to keep all of that in mind as they move forward and see if they're going to make any revisions, any changes to the short-term rental ordinance. Shifting now to county government, the county commission had a work session last week, and they got an update from Chris Caldwell, the chief financial officer for the county, on kind of where the county is budget-wise. They're getting close to being halfway through the year. The at the beginning of next year, they'll start working, the county government, school system, sheriff's office, everybody will start working on their budgets for the next fiscal year. And one of the topics was, kind of how are we doing this year? What's the status? There was one bit of really good news, is that sales tax revenues are continuing to go up, and they're higher than expected. They're even though the economy's been struggling. Of course, one thing is inflation might have helped increase those revenues, because when things cost more, you pay more in sales taxes. But sales taxes are still very robust, and that's good news for the county as far as being able to have the revenues to cover their budgeting and their debt service and everything else. However, there's always a however when you deal with financial folks. There are concerns that the economy, there's so many economic indicators are not where you'd want them to be, and big concern that the recession is on the horizon, and that something that would have an impact on sales tax revenues in the future. But as the last couple of years have shown us, predicting anything is hazardous at best these days. So the bottom line is the revenues are good, but the future outlook is a little cloudy, and we're not sure what's going to happen down the road. Now we'll move on to another city topic, and at City Council this week, the council gave the Knoxville Police Department the authority to seek a $2 million state grant for violence intervention programs. And violence intervention has been a big topic. It's become a priority for Mayor Indy Kincannon's administration, and this funding could go to technology upgrades, go to paying overtime to officers, whatever they need to do. It's not a done deal yet. They're applying to the state for this grant, and one of the things that the grant requires is they have a law enforcement partner. The Knox County Sheriff's Office is, of course, the most obvious one to partner. I don't know if they're going to do that or not. It's still in the very early stages of the planning, so there's not really a plan yet for how Knoxville Police Department's going to go forward with it. But the Sheriff's Office is a possibility. They could also partner with a city police department or county sheriff's office outside of Knox County. There's not a restriction on that, as long as they fashion the program to beat the state's guidelines. Now, if all this sounds like, if you remember, it might sound like it's kind of being redundant, because the city already has an office called the Community Safety Office, and they do violence intervention, or not they themselves. They coordinate community groups that do that are not affiliated with the police department. One of them was just recently created with $450,000 in city funding. It's called Turn Up Knox. They just got started. Well, the KPD grant, if they get it, allows them to work with community groups and nonprofits. However, it requires that whatever group they work with have 5 years of experience using evidence-based approaches to violence interruption. So Chief Noel said the other day that he doesn't think that we even have an organization that meets the state's criteria. So this would be a total law enforcement side of the equation, as far as trying to stop violent crime, particularly gun violence, before it happens. And one of the things that is imperative on as far as the city is concerned, is identifying who is most at risk of either participating in gun violence or being a victim of gun violence. So, and one of the person at city government who you go to get answers to those questions about violence interruption is LaKenya Middlebrook. She is the director of the Community Safety Office, and Jesse and I sat down with her via Zoom earlier this week, and we've got an interview with her, and we'll just go ahead and roll that. Our guest this week is LaKenya Middlebrook. She is the Community Safety Director for the City of Knoxville. Welcome, LaKenya.
Thank you all so much for having me.
Tell us, for our listeners, I mean, the Community Safety Office was only created a year ago or so, in August of 2021. So tell our listeners what it is that the Community Safety Office does and what your role is.
Yeah, so as you said, we are just about a year old, a little over a year old. We're the newest department for the city of Knoxville, and our tasks kind of fall within what I like to think of as three buckets. And so the one that people are probably most familiar with is serving as the city's kind of centralized point for violence reduction efforts, and thinking about how we are working with our community-based partners, with our public safety departments, with other systems level stakeholders and interested people, and building out a comprehensive violence reduction strategy, and supporting the implementation of that strategy, and building capacity for some of our community-based organizations, and just kind of making sure that that work is happening and that someone is accountable for doing that work. The second bucket is really around thinking about how we are connecting our public safety departments with community. A lot of times when we think about, especially like our police department and our fire departments and the work that they do that has such a tremendous impact on the communities they serve, those industries and those professions have very specific rules about how they operate and hierarchies. And sometimes it's really easy to get siloed in that work. And so thinking about how we can best support connecting the communities that they serve to those public safety departments, and elevating the needs of those communities, and as they're thinking about what strategies they're implementing, what their policies and procedures look like, that we are continually thinking about elevating the voice of the impacted communities in that work. And then the third bucket really has to do with our internal capacity. As most folks know, the city of Knoxville has a lot of departments, and there are a lot of moving pieces and a lot of really great work happening. But just like, so many other entities, folks really focus on the work that they know how to do, and they're doing that work well. And we don't always necessarily communicate cross-departmentally, and we're not necessarily always thinking big picture about how the work we can do can be really focused in a way and be driven through collaboration to really promote community safeties in our communities that are most impacted. And so bringing together some of our different city departments to have those conversations, to think about what services are happening where, and how that work can be focused and promote collaboration between departments to really achieve our safety needs. So it's a lot of things.
Yeah, but they seem to be all interrelated.
Right.
So
So it's easy. It's not like one of the buckets you talked about is completely separate from the other buckets.
Exactly.
There are pipes running between them. So one thing that was curious about from the time you started in 2021 to now, kind of describe what the violence reduction landscape kind of was as far as community groups doing that, and what it was when you began, what you've been doing since then, and then where it stands now. I know, and you can bring up turn up Knoxville too, turn up Knox as because that's been a big push from the city.
Yeah. So as we started this work, even before the Office of Community Safety existed, and a big part of the decision by Mayor Kincannon to start the Office of Community Safety, which I will probably interchangeably just refer to it as OCS, because saying Office of Community Safety over and over and over again can get kind of cumbersome. But, as she kind of made the decision to start OCS, it came out of some work that had been happening for several months, for almost a year actually, before OCS was developed, with our public safety departments, with our policy, our chief policy officer, with myself in my position then as park director, and our community engagement manager at the time is Kathy Mack. Really having conversations with community to assess what members of our community saw as being greatest needs, what resources were already there, where there may be opportunity to develop new resources and capacity, as well as really digging into better understanding what some evidence-based strategies are, what works, what's been proven to work in other communities, and whether or not we had that capacity here in our community. But it didn't necessarily have anywhere that it clearly lived, right? It didn't necessarily fall strictly within the work that Park does. And to some degree, it overlapped with some of the work that the Empower Knox initiative was responsible for, but didn't necessarily fully sit there either, because most of their work is youth focused. All of their work for the most part is youth focused. And we know that violence spans all age demographics. And so that was kind of what led to the development of OCS. But in having those conversations, it really gave us the opportunity to better understand, one, how our community understands the work of violence reduction and violence prevention. It's a very broad term, and there are a lot of things that can fit within it, and understand what resources already existed. And so what we found was we have a lot of great organizations that are doing some really important enrichment work that can have a wonderful impact on long-term prevention strategies. But when we think about violence interruption and really engaging the folks at highest or proven risk for being involved in violence in the near term, we saw some opportunity to build some capacity there. And so we, in talking to communities across the country and folks who have done this work for a while, one of the things that we heard over and over and over and over and over again was that knowing now, if they had known then what they know now, violence interruption, street outreach type programs would be where they would start. And I'm a person that does not believe in learning hard. And so I took that to heart. And honestly and truly, when we think about some of the evidence-based strategies that are proven to work, a lot of those things take some time and a lot of coordination across systems to build out in a really effective way. And the great thing about street outreach is that it's really rooted in community, right? It's really about identifying folks who are credible messengers in community, who have significant ties, who have lived experience, those folks who, the folks who are at highest risk for participating in violence will be most likely to connect to, and it's really building their capacity to work in community on a daily basis to try to de-escalate some of these situations, to try to make these connections of individuals to resources that can help support them. And so it seemed like a natural fit to start there. So we had conversations over the course of many months about what that can look like, who would want to lead and be involved in that work. And that's where Turn Up Knox was born. So we had the opportunity to, this past summer, get some funding approved to launch that pilot. And it has been really great to see that organization taking shape. They're just a few months old, but they are really dedicated and committed to learning the craft, to being present in community and building those relationships and establishing their presence as Turn Up Knox. Many of them are folks who had a presence in the community and folks know who they are, which is a huge benefit. But to helping the community understand what Turn Up Knox is going to be able to do. And I'm really excited to see how it evolves over time. Again, it's still in the very early stages. And so they're still building capacity, but we're really excited for what they've been able to do so far and where it can grow in the future.
Well, and can you talk a little more specifically about their work? Because I feel like when people hear a phrase like street outreach, they might imagine any number of things. Like on a day-to-day basis, what does that look like? What are the people involved in that actually going out and doing?
Yeah, so a lot of it in the early phases is that community building work, right? They're at events. They are going about doing some of the things that they normally would do anyway. They're present in communities. They're talking to families. And as the work evolves, it really kind of becomes, and where we see this work going as their capacity grows, the way I kind of make it make sense to people, and this may not be the best way, but the way I kind of try to make it make sense to people is that it's kind of a marriage of case management and mentorship, right? So what you are doing, what they will be doing is building networks of support around individuals who are at highest risk for participating in violence, to really help them work with them and identifying what their needs are, what their goals are, what are going to be the things that they can achieve to have a life that doesn't involve them participating in violence, getting the supports that they need. But also a big part of it is de-escalating conflict, right? And so where we know that an incident has happened and there's a likely potential for retaliation, intervening in those situations, because a lot of times, buying just a little bit of time makes all the difference in an incident escalating or not escalating. And so intervening in those situations to de-escalate conflict, to mediate where possible, to prevent one situation from becoming 3 or 4 incidents is a big part of what they do. And some of that work they've already been able to do. I've been really inspired. I was in some training that they were doing around conflict resolution and de-escalation and communication skills. And I noticed a few of them kind of hurried out on a call, and I was just like, is everything okay? But someone had reached out to them about a potential situation that, would involve some retaliation, and they were able to have some conversations with some folks and cool some tensions and dispel some rumors to ease those situations. And so they are already engaging in that work. And the great thing is that some of these folks, this is a role that they kind of occupied just as members of the community. They were folks that the community trusted. If I'm having an issue, then, I'll talk to you about it, or whatever the case may be. And so now it's just about professionalizing them and giving them the additional tools and resources to be able to do it in a really impactful way.
Yeah, one thing that you got the street outreach component there, but you also talked about evidence-based strategies as well. And it sounds like that the goal is to kind of blend the two. And then, recently, Thomas Abt, who's a nationally recognized policing expert, did an analysis of gun violence in Knoxville that you are going to use, and that appears to be the evidence-based component of this. As part of the evidence-based component of this, to go with the street outreach. So in that report that he presented, what were the things that that you already kind of knew from street outreach that you've done and just being a member of the community, and what things were a little surprising to you?
Yeah, and I'll say so. Violence interruption street outreach is technically it's an evidence-based strategy. The important piece of and where the problem analysis really comes into play is as we think about these evidence-based strategies, they're only effective if they're data informed, right? And so the problem analysis really gives us the data needed to implement a starting point of data needed to implement these strategies in an effective way. So as I looked at the report, as a person who has spent, the last couple of years, kind of engulfed in this information, there was not a lot that stood out to me as being surprising, which I was really comforted in. Because one of the things that I was most concerned about is that we will get this report and there will be some information that, we didn't anticipate or I had not seen kind of coming along in doing this work. And so now I'm trying to figure out how or where we're missing information. And so the fact that it wasn't super surprising to me was actually a great thing because I look at these numbers and this type of information on a regular basis. I think one of the things that may be counterintuitive to a lot of folks in the community that I think is going to be really, really important to how we're developing programs and to folks understanding why we are developing programming and implementing strategies in the way that we are, were the age demographics. Because a lot of times when folks think about community-based violence, they think about very young people, right? And I think a lot of that is because when we have incidents that involve young people in our community, it feels especially devastating. I mean, it's devastating no matter who it is, but it feels especially devastating when it's a young person. And so it tends to be covered a little bit more than incidents that maybe involve somebody who's 35 years old. And so it feels like it's mostly young people because those are the incidents that we hear about the most. But in reality, most of our violent incidents, and especially our homicides, involve individuals who are between the ages of 18 and 34. And then kind of the next age range up, that 35 to 44, is actually more involved than our under 17, our 17 and unders. So, as we think about how we are directing services, I think a lot of times we have a natural inclination to direct services toward our young people. And I think that absolutely needs to continue. Our young people need these resources. They need supports. They need services. And I think that that's going to be really critical to seeing long-term prevention. But we also have to start wrapping our minds around how we are willing to support and able to support folks who may be a little bit older than we're used to serving, may have extensive criminal histories, because if we're going to be serious about seeing reductions in homicide and violent crime in our community, then we have to engage the folks who are most likely to participate, and those tend to be young to middle adults. And those tend to be folks who have, criminal history before it gets to be a violent incident. I think folks also may be surprised about the number of groups or gangs that we have in our community. And I will say the problem analysis, I think it's important for folks to realize the problem analysis is covering a 3-year period. So it's 2019 to 2020. And the way groups and gangs kind of work now is not what folks who are my age or a little bit older are used to from the 80s and 90s, where you've kind of got, 2 or 3 larger organizations, and there's kind of a hierarchy and structure. And, it's very clear where alliances are and where conflict may be. You have a lot of smaller sects that may shoot off. And so this time next year, these groups may look very different because, person A and person B fell out in the same group. And so person B started their own. And they may all live on the same block. And so it's much more fluid than we're used to. And so I think a lot of times folks think in terms of, group A, group B, group C, but really what we're dealing with is like 1A and 1B and 2C, and 1B may be cool with 2C, but 1A doesn't like them. And it's not as cut and dry, I think, as people would expect.
Well, maybe a question to close on, because as you say, I mean, your office is new and some of these strategies are new, but the efforts aren't. Obviously, the city's been working for quite some time on, trying to address issues of violence in the community. And I think there's a tendency among people in the general public to kind of maybe not pay attention to the work that's going on. Or, maybe they hear, oh, there's this program or that office. But then something happens, because we do have, and as you say, especially you can have a particular event and it might just involve a couple of people, but it's really tragic and it gets everybody's attention. And there can be a tendency for people to say, well, obviously nothing that we're doing is working. And so I guess what would you say to people in terms of, I don't know, I guess the need to kind of maintain some consistency of effort and understand that you're not going to solve everything in the short term?
Yeah, what I always try to remind folks of is that we did not get to these places overnight, and we're not going to resolve every issue overnight. And it's going to take time. It's going to take sustained attention and investment and commitment to having a significant impact. And so, just because an incident happens doesn't mean that we throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, okay, none of it's working. I also tend to caution folks to remember, and part of the challenge in violence interruption work and violence prevention is that it's really hard to measure what didn't happen, right? And so there may be an incident that happened, but these programs may have prevented 3 or 4 things that you never heard about because it didn't happen. And so it's important to think about that as well. And I always want to encourage folks that, my hope is that we are beyond success, that we are excessively successful, right? I am not Pollyannish to believe that we can prevent every single incident from happening, but we need to try. Right. And we want to try to have as big of an impact as possible. But even as folks, see, hopefully in the next year, 2 years, 3 years going forward, as our violent incidents are coming down, I also don't want folks to get complacent, because that's another thing that happens too. It's kind of, two sides of the same coin. We get folks who, anytime there's an incident, it's like nothing's working, throw it all out. And then when you start to see results, it's like, oh, well, the problem is gone. We don't need to be bothered with this work anymore. And it's like, no, we're seeing improvement because it's working and we need to sustain it. And so my hope is that we as a community will really start to understand and embrace and learn more. And I think that's why these conversations, and I really appreciate you all having it today, are so important, because the more we learn and understand what these strategies are, why we're doing it, and what the potential impact will be, that we understand that it's work that needs to be institutionalized. Just like when it snows, we know that the roads are going to be salted. We know that the trash is going to be picked up. We need to know that violence prevention and interruption is going to happen in our community on an ongoing basis, and not just, when we see these dramatic spikes and we all try to figure out what to do. Once we get back to a level set, we don't need to say, okay, we fixed it. We can wash our hands of it.
All right.
Well, okay, LaKenya, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation, and we look forward to tracking the progress as everything unfolds. And as you said, the violence intervention efforts with these community groups, their capacity grows, and see how that works out. So thank you very much for joining us again, and we will talk to you again soon.
Excellent. Thank you all so much.
Thanks a lot.
And we want to thank LaKenya Middlebrook for joining us on Compass Points this week. Next, we'll turn our attention to questions that we get our readers to submit to us through our private Facebook group for subscribers called the Compass Colloquy. That's one of the many benefits that you get from a subscription to Compass. Another one is, of course, the daily newsletter that you get in your inbox every weekday morning, and then you get the longer stories on the website. Anyway, we solicit questions from readers, and one of the questions from this week is about the next Knox County Republican Party chair. Daniel Herrrera is wrapping up a 2-year term early next year, and he has decided not to seek re-election. Herrera's kind of a young, he's an attorney, he's kind of a young firebrand, he was elected basically to bring some energy to the Knox County Republican Party, to make sure that they don't get complacent with the majorities that they have on the county commission and in the state legislative delegation. Anyway, Herrera has he decided not to seek re-election. He said he wants to spend more time on his law firm with his family, and so next in February, when the Republicans have their county convention, they're going to select a successor, and there's already one person who has put their name forward. It's Kyle Ward. He is a county commissioner, and he, like Herrera, is young, but he also has some experience that Herrera doesn't have. He doesn't have, or he has experience as an elected official. He's a business owner. He's been campaigning himself. So Herrera's always been a behind the scenes kind of guy. Ward has been out front. So we got our question was essentially, what does this mean moving forward? Well, right now it doesn't mean anything, because Ward isn't guaranteed to be elected as the chair. Others may also put their name in the hat. Ward does have an advantage over just about anybody who would seek that, because County Mayor Glenn Jacobs and Congressman Tim Burchett are in his corner already. So that's one thing that we will follow. One of the questions will be, whether it's Ward or whoever succeeds Herrera, will they overtly put forward candidates in the nonpartisan city elections, as they did under Herrera last year. That didn't work out so well. None of the Republican candidates or candidates who were put forward by the Republican Party won, and so it remains to be seen if Ward or whoever is eventually named chair will continue to or try to repeat that with better results, of course, as the Republicans would want. So anyway, we will be following that. We'll be covering the county convention in February, and so
I'm going to interrupt
we'll
real quick with a question there, Scott.
Oh, sure, Seth. Thanks.
Is there any conflict with Ward currently holding an elected seat and holding the chairship?
I don't believe so. It's the Republican. It's up to the Republican Party's bylaws, and I have not looked at their bylaws to see that. I don't think that there is an issue. But
right, because technically, right now, Elaine Davis is the District 18 elect and the treasurer or secretary right now, and so I guess that would.
Well, she took a leave from being vice chair during her campaign. Mm-hmm. I don't know if she's allowed to continue on. I don't see why there would be a problem other than if it's just in the Republican bylaws.
Right. Okay. That was just curiosity. Thank you.
I don't think there's not a state statute about it, but no.
Right. It's not a law rule, but it's potentially a
party. Yeah, the parties make up their own rules for their
it's
candidates.
Like 20 pages.
One of the in fact, the Republicans, of course, have a thing. You have to be a bona fide Republican. You have to vote in so many Republican primaries in a row, and basically prove that you are indeed a real Republican and not an independent or even a Democrat in Republican clothing. So,
yes.
So that is pretty much everything from last week, and we'll turn our attention to next week. And next week, of course, is Thanksgiving. So we're going to have a very short week. We are only be a couple of days where there will be a whole lot of news going on. So next week's Compass Points might be a little abbreviated, much like this week's is a little abbreviated. But we will cover what does happen, and you'll know about it if you're a subscriber. You'll know about it when you read Compass or get it in your email every weekday morning. We're still going to do those during the week, and or when next week rolls around, you can listen to our recap on here on Compass Points. So with that, we'll wrap it up. I want to thank Seth Barber, our intrepid producer with Barbarian Productions. And Seth, appreciate that. You have a great Thanksgiving, I hope.
Thank you.
Next week. Do you have any big plans?
No, I'm leaving today for my annual hunting trip. That's my big fall, winter to-do. But we got family doing stuff on Thanksgiving, and then I've got a second Thanksgiving with a second in-law family and all that. So it's always a lot of food and hopefully a nap.
Well, you have two Thanksgivings, so you nap in between, maybe, so that's okay. Also, want to thank Will Wright for our music, and next week, hopefully, Jesse will be back with us to give his insights. And
he owes us an update on the Elon Musk email that he got the other day, or whatever.
We'll need to check in with him to see if Musk has solicited Jesse's advice. Just judging from what I've read, it couldn't hurt. Anyway, and Jesse's fees are reasonable, as he says. So maybe Musk will reach out to him. But anyway, we will be back next week. Everybody out there have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you then.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.